Hey Krishna, how are you doing? Yes, good. So are you listening Krishna Dhun? Yes, Chris movie. So thank you so much for inviting Jaipur Literature Festival 2026. So myself Ravindra, uh, I am presenting Krishna Dhun. So listening for music and enjoy.
are thankful to Ravindraji, the artists who performed the Dhol Cholam, and Nathulal Solanki and his fellow artists. We are thankful to Infosys Foundation for supporting this cause, supporting the classical and folk art form and artists across India. Next, the closing debate, ladies and gentlemen. Freedom of speech is a dangerous idea. Is free speech the bedrock of liberty, or a perilous and untenable idea in a volatile age? Hislop, Pavan Varma, Alice Oswald, Anish Gawande, Navtej Sarna, Priyanka Chaturvedi, Navdeep Suri, and Fara Dabhoiwala. The session will be in conversation. This debate will be moderated by none other than Vir Sanghvi. But before that, may I request Sanjoy Roy, Managing Director and Festival Co-Director, to please come upon and address.
You know, when it comes to after the first day, which is in this case was the 15th, we all sort of breathed a sigh of relief and said, chalo, the first day is behind us. By the time we get to Saturday, it's like, wow, we're halfway through. And when we get to this time, on the last day at 5 o'clock, we begin to start missing the festival and wondering why don't we have at least one more day, or one more session, or one more music. On behalf of my colleagues at Timbuk Arts, our festival co-directors, Namita Gokhale and William Dalrymple, a very big thank you to all our speakers who've come and traveled from across the world and across India and across Rajasthan to be with us. Please give them a big round of applause for all their writing and everything that they've done. To our amazing artists who've come, the Pungcholam, and of course, Nathulal Solanki, who you've heard through the festival and who you will hear during the debate. A big shout out to all our volunteers, all 400 of them. They've been absolutely amazing. To the trainers, Punita, Rijul, Bhanu, Shanu, and the Yuva Ekta Foundation. Thank you for building this movement with the volunteers, not just from Jaipur, but from across India, from America, and again across the world. Thank you, folks. A big shout out. Everybody says you folks have been the most amazing. So come on, guys. They've all looked after you and us. To the Rajasthan police who ensured that we've been safe, and to all our security folks, thank you. To our technical crew, all of the video people, the press who've been so supportive, a big shout out to each one of you. And we look forward to receiving you back in the 20th year. Who would have thought we would have got to the 19th year? The fact that we've got here, we've completed the 19th year, in itself is a huge achievement. So thank you for giving us all your energy and getting us to this point. None of this would be possible without the generous support of all our sponsors and partners and collaborators and everybody that Preeta and her team have brought to the table. So a shout out to them. A big thank you to our new friends, Hani Farsi, Hani Kaloti, Saad, Rafi, Louisa. I don't know whether they're here or they've left, but thank you so much. And of course to the Vedanta group, thank you for standing by us and making this possible. And finally, to all my colleagues at Timbuk Arts, a big hug. I know we drive each other crazy, but that's what you need to do, the crazy energy to do a crazy festival. And finally, to the two people who create this wonderful program, Namita Gokhale and William Dalrymple, thank you all for bringing these riches to us, and come and say a few words.
Very frankly, I have very few words to say. I'm in tears. I'm not always in tears, but I've been to a session which was the Poetry of Remembrance, dedicated to some people who used to come here every year and their children. This 20 years has become a generational thing for writers, new writers. Memories come by, and in my programming for the 20th year, I'm going to look back at the last so many years. At 2013, when Mahashweta came, at least 5 of my sessions will be dedicated to memories of the past, and the rest to the future. So here's to the future, here's to the past, here's to the Jaipur Literature Festival. Thank you.
We will be back next year, and among some of the international authors who've already agreed to come, after 20 years of trying, Zadie Smith will be with us. Jason Burke, Elizabeth Gilbert, Eleanor Barraclough, Katie Hessel, Robert Harris. Anyway, it goes on. There's a long list. But they'll all be here next year. It's going to be one of our biggest years ever. So please see you back here, same time next year.
20 years, it also means it's a time to introspect, to see what's worked, what hasn't, and come back to you with renewed energy. Please send us any suggestions you may have had. Yes, we know it's not always perfect. Yes, we know it's somewhat crowded. As somebody came to see, why did you have so many young people? It's for them, this festival. If we're going to bring about change in the world, they need to bring about change. They need to have considered information. I think our generation has failed the planet, failed each other, failed society, haven't prevented the kind of violence that we're seeing around it. Maybe they'll have a better chance if they have informed choices. That's what we try to do. So thank you all so much. And now to the debate that marks the closing. So as all of you know, I'm going to give the rules, and then I'm going to give you what the debate is, introduce our speakers, and then make sure that we poll you. Remember, you have to shout the loudest, throw your arms in the air so that we know which side of the debate is winning. So we're going to begin. I'm going to invite everybody up one by one for the motion, against the motion, or neither side of the motion. It's a contested topic in this case. We're going to allow each speaker to give their opening statement, 3 minutes each. As you know, Nathuji Solanki is going to give them a warning, a bang on the drum at 2 minutes, 30 seconds, and at 3 minutes, they will be drowned out if they're continuing to speak. After that, they'll each be given 2 minutes to rebut whatever they've heard from each other, and that will be followed by Vir Sanghvi posing questions to the panel to be able to get more clarity, after which we will open it out for audience questions. We will take questions in clusters, so put up your hands. Please, at this point of time, do not necessarily make a comment, but pose a question to either side of the House. We will then conclude the debate with a 2-minute time for each of our speakers to give their point of view, and then I'll come back and take a vote from you to see if you have changed your mind and to see which side has carried the motion. Today's closing debate for the 19th edition of the Jaipur Literature Festival, Vedanta Presents, is: this House proposes that freedom of speech is a dangerous idea. So I'm repeating that freedom of speech is a dangerous idea. An idea of this came about, we were listening to Fara Dabhoiwala, who's going to be on stage today. We were listening to his session that he did in Seattle around his book, and it came home that both sides of the divide of this speech is problematic. We are seeing that if you have the freedom to speak, you also need to have a responsibility to ensure that what you're saying does not necessarily impact or cause huge distress to other communities that do not have access in the way that we do. Speaking for the motion, Anish Gawande, a politician, writer, and art world troublemaker who also wears some of the fanciest jackets in town. Based between Mumbai and Delhi, he's the national spokesman of the NCP Sharad Pawar party and is the founder of the Pink List India, the country's first archive of politicians supporting the LGBTQ+ rights. Anish Gawande. Speaking against the motion, Alice Oswald, a celebrated British poet. She has recently worked with young poets in Gaza, co-editing 3 volumes of their writing, including From Dust We Rise. Her work and mentorship continue to influence contemporary poetry around the world, bringing attention to overlooked voices and renewing the relevance of ancient narratives through her distinctive, resonant style and vision. Alice Oswald. Speaking for neither for nor against, or speaking for both sides, is Fara Dabhoiwala, whose book actually triggered this idea, a senior research scholar at Princeton University and author of What is Free Speech? The History of a Dangerous Idea, a fresh and exciting approach to one of the most controversial subjects of our time. Ladies and gentlemen, Fara Dabhoiwala. And for those of you who may be more interested in this idea, because it is a complex idea, it's not a simple black and white. If you really want to know the gray in between those lines, pick up his book. It's still available. I think it's available. I don't know whether it's sold out. At the Crossword bookstores, Crossword saying it's available. So maybe, I don't know if they're signing, but maybe you can bring the books out here for their signing later. So Fara Dabhoiwala, thank you for being here. Against the motion, Ian Hislop, who, when I said thank you so much, Ian, for coming out to the Jaipur Literature Festival, we haven't seen you for so many years, he said, I'm one of the few people who know how to say no to William Dalrymple. Ian Hislop is a writer, journalist, and broadcaster. He was educated at the Ardingly College and Magdalen College, Oxford. In 2026, he celebrates 40 years as an editor of The Private Eye. Ladies and gentlemen, Ian Hislop. Speaking for the motion, somebody who you all know and is bound to create controversies and perhaps cross the floor at least once, if not twice, Pavan Varma is a writer, former diplomat, and political leader. He served as a member of parliament in the Rajya Sabha and earlier as an advisor to the Chief Minister of Bihar with the rank of cabinet minister. Pavan Varma, writer and author of over 20 books. Speaking against the motion is Navdeep Suri. He was earlier India's High Commissioner to Australia, Ambassador to Egypt and the UAE. Today, Navdeep writes a number of books. His new book is going to be coming out later this year. It's going to be on the history of UAE and India relations. Ladies and gentlemen, Navdeep Suri. Speaking for the motion, Priyanka Chaturvedi is a member of parliament. She always thinks that I've forgotten her, but when it comes to a debate, she's one of the first people we think of. Priyanka Chaturvedi, a member of parliament in the Rajya Sabha from Maharashtra. She's the deputy leader and national spokesperson of the Shiv Sena UBT, or now UBT, and both sides. I think they're both united recently. She has been a member of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Communications and Information Technology since 2024, and she's on the Consultative Committee on External Affairs since 2020. Priyanka Chaturvedi. Speaking against the motion, Navtej Sarna, distinguished diplomat and author, having served as India's ambassador to the United States, High Commissioner to the United Kingdom, and the ambassador to Israel. He's also been secretary to the Government of India and the Foreign Office spokesperson, with earlier postings in Moscow, Warsaw, Thimphu, Tehran, Geneva, and Washington, D.C. Moderating the session, our wonderful moderator who joins us every year, Vir Sanghvi, possibly the best-known Indian journalist of his generation. He became editor of Bombay Magazine at 22, making him the youngest editor in the history of Indian journalism. Vir Sanghvi. Why is there one extra chair? I think we've got the chair numbers wrong, so we should remove the smaller chair from there and enthrone Vir on his throne next to Navtej.
I thought the small chair was for me.
So this is the time, remember, that you have to shout, make a noise, and tell us in the beginning of this debate, which side of the debate do you think you are going to be voting for? So listen to the proposition again. This House proposes that freedom of speech is a dangerous idea. Those for the motion that the freedom of speech is a dangerous idea, make some noise and put up your hands. So we have a very minuscule population who think that freedom of speech is a dangerous idea. After all, it's the Jaipur Literature Festival. For those of you, again, the House proposes that the freedom of speech is a dangerous idea. Those of you who are against the motion, make some noise and put up your hands. Ladies and gentlemen, you've got your work cut out for. Over to you, Vir.
Thanks, Sanjoy. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Hello again. Welcome yet again to the closing debate of the Jaipur Literary Festival. Sanjoy's told you a bit about the motion and you voted on it. As you will see, it's a somewhat lopsided motion. It's very hard to find people who will say in a democracy that freedom of speech is not a good idea. Though actually looking at things in India at the moment, I'm not so sure about that. But even so, I mean, at a literary festival, certainly you should be supporting freedom of speech. Also, you would think, because this motion is quite cunningly worded, it says freedom of speech is a dangerous idea. It doesn't take a side, it doesn't say good or bad. So you could ask yourself, who is it dangerous to? Is it dangerous for society? Is it dangerous for fascists, for authoritarians, for dictators? You could argue, is it dangerous when it comes to, say, communal relations in a society? Or you could argue, it's a dangerous idea in today's India only because of the reality. What choice you take is up to you. I don't envy the people arguing for the motion, but we'll see how it goes. Sanjoy has explained the rules to you. They're immensely complicated because the speakers speak first, then they speak again, then I let you ask questions, then I ask them questions, then they speak again and rebut it. Every single year I've moderated this debate, I've forgotten which order that goes in, but hopefully I'll get it right this year. So let me not disturb you any longer. Can we start with the first speaker for the motion, whose name I have written over here? Can I start with proposing the motion, Anish Gawande?
In 2013, the Supreme Court of India called queer people a minuscule minority. By 2018, we had demonstrated what power the minuscule minority has in this country. So the minuscule minority of you today who are for the motion, I hope, will convince the rest of you in the audience today that the freedom of speech indeed is a dangerous idea. I cannot start a debate on the freedom of speech without going back to that famous quote by Voltaire, which is that I might disagree with everything you have to say, but I will defend to death your right to say it. Over the course of the last century, that quote has become a lightning rod, inspiring all of us, me included, at Model United conferences and debates at school much like this one, to proclaim it as the foundation of liberty, perhaps the bedrock of democracy. The best part about that quote is Voltaire never said it. Now, the problem, though, is that it does draw upon what Voltaire and Immanuel Kant and the rest of the Enlightenment thinkers thought, which is that the freedom of speech was indeed the bedrock of the freedoms that they enjoyed, of a rationality that had to fight back against superstition, and of a new age of modernism that had to fight back against both crown and church. The problem, though, as Pankaj Mishra reminded us not too long ago, is that freedom of speech was always only for the few, by the few, and of the few. Because the same Voltaire who could come up with that quote had the idea that black people had only a little more intelligence than animals, and Kant thought of them as not very intelligent at all. the most powerful point to prove that this freedom of speech did not apply to everyone is the fact that the last woman to be burnt alive for being a witch was burnt in the late 1700s in Switzerland, long after Voltaire was dead. Now, I tell you this why? Because I propose that the freedom of speech has always been a dangerous idea. It is not only a dangerous idea today, and nothing proves it better than the patron saints of the freedom of speech that we see today, who are none other than the Elon Musks of this world. In a world where the sort of patron saint of freedom of speech is Elon Musk, where Tommy Robinson and Milo Yiannopoulos are the ones claiming to be the defenders of free speech, and where freedom of speech allows Andrew Tate to make the most sexist remarks and go unchecked, what freedom does the freedom of speech really hold? I want to say here that the freedom of speech has allowed death threats to enter Priyanka in my DMs. It has allowed for Goli Maro Salo Ko to become a slogan that's raised in New Delhi. It has allowed for those who are surviving on the margins of society to be silenced continuously under the name of freedom of speech, because in the freedom of speech we have forgotten that the conditions to defend the freedom of speech are important to defend, not the freedom of speech itself. Because what freedom does the freedom of speech hold for the Dalit man in Bihar who is lynched not for what he says but because of who he loves? What freedom does that freedom of speech hold?
Thank you, Anish. Thank you so much. Can I ask Alice Oswald now to speak against the motion?
What really frightens me is the question, who is going to regulate my speech? Who is going to make the rules which unfree my speech? Is it going to be Yvette Cooper or Keir Starmer? How am I going to be allowed to object to a government which tries to run my country as a business rather than a society? If I choose to think or say something unprofitable, will I be called a terrorist? Will I be shut in prison for 14 years for disagreeing? The greatest danger that we face is having our speech curtailed by a morally bankrupt government. And so I would like to know who you think will be making the rules which will unfree my speech. Is there anybody? Would even Shakespeare or Homer or Dante be good judges of how I personally should think? Even the great lawmaker Solon, one of the great civilizers and transmitters of Homeric poetry, decided that women's speech was really not very orderly, was not going to be conducive to a democracy, especially the way women banged on and on when one of their relatives had been killed. And if women gathered by graves in cemeteries and chose to sing powerful laments and grieve and be unable to forget the deaths of children or brothers or husbands, Solon decided to curb that kind of speech. He said you can't have funeral processions in the morning, you must have them silently at night. So if even Solon, the great lawmaker, ended up creating a role of gunaikonomos, which is somebody who curbs the speech of women, well then I greatly fear who is going to curb my speech. So my worldly answer is I will not accept anybody else's decision about how I should speak or think. And my other worldly answer is that speech is not just what comes out of the mouth and the lips and the teeth. It is also made by the ears which listen, the eyebrows which are raised when you hear something.
Thank you. I think everybody gets a start when that drum starts going. Sanjoy said when he introduced the debate that the idea for the motion came to him at one of the JLF sessions abroad when he heard Fara Dabhoiwala speaking about this, because Farah's written the definitive book on the subject. And since then, after we had this somewhat provocative motion, it's been a question of trying to press gang people into speaking on one side or the other. Because Farah actually had the idea, and because his book is subtle and nuanced, he's refused to accept a for or against principle. So he's going to try and speak and take us a little forward without necessarily taking sides. Ladies and gentlemen, Fara Dabhoiwala.
Thank you, Vir. So I've been under considerable pressure over email from Sanjoy and the team to come out either for or against. And I think next time I come, if I'm lucky enough to be invited, I might be in a less nice hotel. But I refused. And then Sanjoy just told me I'm not allowed to stand at either of the glamorous, large, luxurious podiums. I have to stand in the middle, naked and defenseless. So I'm going to just always do what he says. I have just written a book, which is incredibly readable and affordable and available in the bookshop, which is called What is Free Speech? The History of a Dangerous Idea. And in the opening pages, I explain that it is a dangerous idea for two opposite reasons. The first is a good reason, the reason that we all cheer and whoop and want to be for free speech. I believe in free speech. It's a great ideal. It's a necessary ideal in any free society. And that good reason is because it allows everyone, the voiceless, the oppressed, the denigrated, the powerless, to speak out and tell their truths and oppose injustice and to call out to others to join them for good causes. And throughout history, as my book shows, it's had this very valuable effect. Early feminists appeal to it, abolitionists. In India, there's a fantastic tradition of nationalists opposing colonial rule, using the appeal to freedom of expression. So, and that's continued to be the case. India today is an autocracy with great damage done to free speech in the good sense. I've just come from the United States. Free speech is under attack in horrible ways there too. Autocrats everywhere want to suppress it because they don't want unwelcome arguments to be made, whether it's about what is happening in Palestine or what is happening in Kashmir, or that climate change is real and not a made-up fiction, or endless other things. That's the first reason they try and suppress it. And the second reason is they don't like the people, the kinds of people who are making these arguments. Women, Palestinians, brown people, black people, however you want to define them, they are not seen as equal speakers or necessarily as having an equal voice. But free speech is also a dangerous idea it's a dangerous idea because it's been, throughout its history, weaponized. It's always about power. It's always about who has the microphone. And demagogues around the world, including this country, use it to spread lies and incite people and create real harm. That's what speech is, an action that can cause harm. And if it shields itself behind that wonderful slogan, free speech, and media companies allow irresponsible speech to spread, that's dangerous.
Thank you, Farah. Now can I ask Ian Hislop to speak against the motion?
I'm just killing time. Okay, here we go. For some reason, I'm on the side of proposing the motion, which is nonsense. Freedom of speech is dangerous. Yes, it is. That's the whole idea. If the motion is freedom of speech a good idea? Yes, it obviously is a good idea. Other people will argue that there's an academic definition of it, who decides, but on the whole, freedom of speech is better than silence for very, very obvious reasons and for a very obvious history. That's point one. Point two is I've actually got skin in this game. I am a journalist. If freedom of speech is pointless, I've wasted my entire life.
So have all the other people who've been arrested this year, a record number ever, and all those who either are in jail or who've died attempting journalism as freedom of speech. So, point two, I definitely have. I have been attempted to put in jail by the Attorney General in Britain, and I have been in court about 35 times, including for contempt of court. It's not theoretical, it's not an academic debate about language. Freedom of speech is incredibly important now. Point three, the fact that people who advocated freedom of speech in the past may not be perfect doesn't matter. Point four, the fact that people who advocate freedom of speech now may not be perfect also doesn't matter. Point five, I don't really have one. Point six, yes, there is no absolute freedom of speech. There is only one person in the world who has absolute freedom of speech, and that's Donald Trump. There is no consequence to anything he says. It doesn't matter whether it makes any sense at all. It doesn't matter if he contradicts it during the same sentence. His attitude to free speech is very, very simple. He says to journalists, you can ask me anything that I like. I've just made that up. He didn't say that. But that is essentially what he's about. But again, that isn't important. In a fine opening speech, he said, you know, the patron saint of freedom of speech is Elon Musk. No, it isn't. Elon Musk is a very, very silly, corrupt American who runs a platform full of drivel, and he now runs an AI. You see, I'm being drowned out. I have no freedom of speech here. Elon Musk, he runs an artificial intelligence, which is an AI thing called Grok, which obviously is very important if you're a paedophile and you want to see people undressed against their will. But let us remember that my magazine calls Grok of shit, which it is. And I'm delighted to have been able to use that word tonight. Freedom of the press!
When we press ganged Ian Hislop be part of this debate, he said he'd never debated before in his life. Seeing how good he was today, maybe he should take it up as a career.
I'll vote for him.
Can I ask Pavan Varma to speak?
Ladies and gentlemen, बहुत मुश्किल है. It's difficult. I'll tell you why it's difficult. Freedom of speech is a good idea. But it's a dangerous idea today. The context has to be very important. Because you have to bear in mind the consequences. And the point has been made that freedom of speech and its definition has become the monopoly of the powerful. Are you willing to face the consequences? Then it's a dangerous idea. That's the proposition today. If you speak the truth and speak it forcefully enough, are you willing to face the charge of sedition? Are you willing to have cases which don't give you bail like UAPA and PMLA slapped on you? Would you like to remain in jail without bail? बात ये है ना कि बात पर वहां जुबान कटती है वो कहें और सुना करे कोई. Somebody else has to listen. I go to television debates. If I try to speak the truth, the anchor joins with the opponents and drowns me out. It's a dangerous idea. Quite simply put, the asymmetry is too great. I am a committed Democrat. In fact, I was to speak against the motion. I am speaking for the motion because this is a debate, but it's true also. I believe in freedom of speech as a good idea, but I accept that it is becoming increasingly dangerous, whether in America or here or elsewhere. And we have to accept that truth. Before you know it, you are anti-national. Then there are the raids, CB, ED, IT, before you know it. And the truth is, they are facts of life. Are you willing to pay the consequences? And even if you are, it's a dangerous thing. You are playing with fire. And by the way, that freedom of speech is happily available to those who are part of the ruling regimen. They can say, build a temple for Godse. They can use a nara, goli maro saloko. But if you oppose it on the basis of freedom of speech, badi dangerous cheez hai bhaiya, jail mein rahoge. So I say it's dangerous because of that. Or last point, social media पर जो आप बोलिए वो distort हो जाता है. शेर ये है कि सच बढ़े या घटे तो सच न रहे. झूठ की कोई इंतहा ही नहीं, कोई इंतहा नहीं. आप जो चाहे कर लीजिए freedom of speech के नाम पर. So therefore I say it's a good thing to have it, but in a fair system, a level playing field. Otherwise it's a dangerous idea. Bear it in mind.
Thanks, Pavan. As good, you've got them going as always. Can I ask Navdeep Suri now to speak against the motion?
So let me make this personal. April 13, 1919, Jallianwala Bagh massacre. My grandfather was there to protest against the Rowlatt Act, which said anyone could be picked up for saying anything deemed subversive. Na vakil, na dalil, na appeal. And so, in 1946, 47, 48, when our Constituent Assembly sat and debated freedom of speech, Article 19 of the Constitution, my grandfather was amongst those who celebrated it. Except that very soon people were putting reasonable restrictions on speech. And who was to define those reasonable restrictions? The government, of course. Prime Minister Nehru was the one who moved the motion. Prime Minister Nehru in 1951 moved the first amendment to add more restrictions. And since then, every single government has felt very, very comfortable with the idea of restricting freedom of speech. Mrs. Gandhi did it in 1975. You thought you were getting a new criminal code to revamp the colonial era laws. Well, check out section 152 and see what it says about subversive activities. And you'll see that that provision on sedition, on seditious speech, which our founding fathers fought so hard to remove, is back there. And how? We cannot trust any government, past, present, or future, to impose what is presented to us as reasonable restrictions on freedom of speech. If eternal vigilance is the price of liberty, we have to be vigilant against these provisions which are cloaked in one law or another law and end up impeding us. Today, there's a whole industry for hurt sentiments. Anyone can be deemed to have a hurt sentiment. It seems to be the most delicate part of our anatomy, that everything else is fine, but my sentiment has been hurt. And I would recommend that soon we should have a ministry for protection of hurt sentiments. Because laughter to allowed nahi hai. Ask Kunal Kamra, ask Munawwar Farooqi, ask Vir Das. So along with the Ministry of Protection of Hurt Sentiments, I would also recommend that the government should seriously look at a department for prevention of laughter. Yeah, because then we will be very careful about what we say, and that is perhaps the way people want us to head. I believe that any restriction on freedom of speech is a very dangerous idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask Priyanka Chaturvedi to speak for the motion?
Good evening, Jaipur. I'd just like to say one thing here. When I saw only a few hands rise up for what we were proposing, I realized one thing, that the tradition continues. Whenever the politicians are on one side, the people are on the other side always. But however, I need to stand for a motion which says freedom of speech is dangerous. Why do I do that? I'd begin with, since Mr. Suri mentioned the First Amendment of our Constitution, I'd begin with Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. He's celebrated as one of the most liberal prime ministers that India had, one of the most inclusive prime ministers India has had. Of course, he's not liked much by the current dispensation, but I would want to introduce my speech with his quote. He said, absolute freedom of speech is theoretical, not practical. Freedom of speech does not mean the right to shout fire in a crowded theater and cause panic, stampede, and deaths. I propose 3 different reasons why I stand for this motion. One is that freedom of speech is not just about ideas, it also enables harm, real-time harm. When you use a grok to give prompts like, why don't you undress her? Why don't you put her in a red bikini? Why don't you show her naked picture without consent and then hide it behind the garb of freedom of speech? That's not freedom of speech, that's criminality, and that is dangerous. I say that freedom of speech is not just about your right to speak. It also ends up creating long-term damages and is a big spreader of fake news and misinformation. How can we forget the anti-vaxxers, not just in India, globally? How much they use this entire argument of freedom of speech and spread absolute fear about vaccination. How can we forget the times that India lived in during the COVID period, where every single thing was up for disinformation and misinformation? And what about climate change? We're hearing this all over, that suddenly climate change has become a woke agenda. You and I are sitting in Jaipur today. Do you even feel a bit of winter here? This is a reason for climate change. When you spread misinformation by using the garb, the veil of freedom of speech, that for me is problematic. Freedom of speech actually enables hate speech and extremism. And that is why I think it's a dangerous proposition. Today, by the time you have spread a fake narrative using technology, what you've done is create a whole lot of narrative which is untrue, unchecked, and people start to believe it, which can lead to long-term damages, and India is facing it. And India will face it for years to come, decades to come, and not just India, the world is facing it. And that is why I say absolute speech, and I agree with Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, that absolute freedom of speech is good in theory, but it's not good in practice. And that is why it's a dangerous proposition, and I stand by the idea of wanting a country which uses freedom of speech, but uses it with responsibility. Thank you.
Okay, our final speaker in this round of speeches. Can I ask Navtej Sarna to speak?
Thank you very much, and good evening. This is the 5th day of this festival. I have done 4 sessions. I've listened to many more. I have drunk deep at the fountain of knowledge. I've also drunk deep at the bar in the author's lounge. So you will excuse me if I cannot understand a debate in which one of my opponents is neither for or against. In any case, I think having listened to the 4 speakers on that side, I am willing to almost concede defeat. Freedom of speech, such speech, is indeed a dangerous idea. Such convoluted arguments, such specious logic, I hope there are not too many children of impressionable age in this audience. So I'm going to try and make it very simple. The first thing is that freedom of speech is a concept. It includes reasonable restrictions. Freedom of speech, even in 6th century BC Athens, where it was started, the birthplace of democracy, even that which allowed every male adult Athenian to go out and address the public assembly. Why women were not allowed is next year's debate. But even there were rules. No sedition, no defamation, and so on. Exactly what happens today. So this is a concept which has carried on. This is the concept which gave birth to the idea of democracy. Everybody's read the John Stuart Mills. He wrote, this is the bedrock of liberty, because this allows you, all of you, to be informed. Then give your consent to a particular government. This is democracy. Otherwise, all of you, and here I disagree with one of my opponents who said that, you know, a peasant in Bihar or a Dalit in Bihar, poor guy, has no freedom of speech. No. That is why some parties win and some parties lose, if you understand that the peasant has a freedom of speech also. If you do not accept this, then you are demonizing not just freedom of speech, you are demonizing democracy. And if you demonize democracy, you will be committed to the tyranny of either the Shah or the Ayatollah or the tyranny of the majority, of which Shri Pavan Varma is so scared of. So therefore, I think there are reasons here, and we will come to it in the next round, as to why reasonable restrictions provide enough safeguards if they are implemented. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. That's round one. Now we have a round two where they have shorter speeches. The theory is that they're supposed to rebut the arguments made by the other side, for everybody except for Farah, who's on no side. But Anish, can you start off by rebutting that side's arguments?
1 second. We've had a powerful speech saying that Elon Musk is not indeed the patron saint of free speech. But the problem is he thinks he's the patron saint of free speech. The problem is that those who think they are the patron of free speech are those like your lecherous professor who thinks calling your classmate Moti is free speech. They are those like your friends who think that using chakka as an insult is free speech. They are those like the Speaker of the Lok Sabha who sometimes thinks that calling a Muslim MP unpardonable names is free speech. And that is precisely the problem. Because the freedom of speech is only available to the few. The freedom of speech is only available to the powerful. Which is precisely why Arnab Goswami has freedom of speech on his television debate, but I do not on that news channel. Which is why we have the freedom of speech here on this panel today, but Umar Khalid does not, and he has to languish in jail. Because it is us champagne socialists on this panel today who can defend the freedom of speech and sell that illusion to you, while we can defend it from the Jaipur Literature Festival, and you too have to rot in jail. And so when we defend the freedom of speech today, let us not defend it as a principle that needs to be defended as a protection of the marketplace of ideas. Let us not move towards this theoretical argument that these are ideas that need to be protected and these ideas will allow us to become a better democracy. But let's find newer vocabularies. Let's think of how we do not care about a freedom of speech, but rather a responsibility to care. Let us reframe this away from freedom of speech, because the freedom of speech in this day and age is a dangerous idea.
Thanks, Anish. Can I ask Alice Oswald now to do her rebuttals?
I think that people choose poetry because they find speech difficult, and for that reason, one might well be forgiven for being frightened of a debate and going and hiding. But I'm frightened of fear. And what I feel I've heard from the other side is this great fear of freedom. And Eric Fromm wrote a whole book about the fear of freedom, because freedom is a terrifying thing to handle. We have to live up to it and rise up to it. So I'm concerned that there is a temptation to stagnate and keep silent instead of loudly arguing against your opponent. And the dumbness that I feel when I'm presented with such eloquent speakers has to be overcome. I feel it's a duty to speak rather more loudly and forcefully than I feel inside myself. So I'm speaking partly inspired by the beautiful noise and chaos of the streets, which I've been witnessing out of my car windows as I'm driven round Jaipur. I'm so impressed by the way nobody sits silent in a traffic jam. Everybody beeps their horn. It feels as if everybody's shouting at the same time and beeping at the same time, and there are even cows on the side of the road which are also exercising freedom of speech. And I feel that I want to join in with this beautiful, energetic and lively debate of life which I've been witnessing here in Jaipur. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you. I don't think I can ask him to rebut anybody because he's on no side, but Farah, would you like to rebut both sides?
Yeah, okay. I just want to share with you before that. I was taken to the media center to talk about the history and the present state of free speech yesterday by a lovely young man who's with the team. And in between journalists, I said to him, so, you know, what are the good media outlets now? I haven't been in India for 13 years. And then I said, are there any good independent journalists criticizing the government these days? And he thought for a bit, and he said, yes, there was one, but now he's been taken offline. Anyway, the problem with free speech, one of the many problems with free speech, as we've heard people on both sides express very articulately, is that there is no real good solution. We all want to figure this out, but it's not a simple problem. It's not a problem that you can solve just philosophically or legally. You actually need the history. If only there were a good book to read about that. But the reason for it is in being insoluble is, on the one hand, if you say, of course, there should be reasonable restrictions, and everyone takes for granted that free speech is not absolute, then you end up always with laws that have the potential to be abused. Laws against sedition, laws against religious incitement, laws against things that are supposed to be dangerous. And then they become weaponized and they become extended and implemented and abused in all sorts of ways. It's happening in India, it's happening in England. On the other hand, if you say, no, I'm an absolutist, freedom is very important, we should have no laws at all, then you open the floodgates to misinformation and lies and real harm and abuse and pogroms and murder and really horrible outcomes. And so one thing that we should remember is something that the author Jonathan Swift remarked in the first age of free speech, was also the first age of mass media. He said, I started till finish. Truth is slow and falsehood is fast. I'll come back to it.
I'll ask you about it later. We'll have a chance.
Very bad at the timing.
All right. Okay. Ready for round two, Ian Hislop? Yeah. All right. Okay.
Can I just say how utterly brilliant it is that someone quoting Jonathan Swift was shut up? Our greatest satirist, the father of the tradition in England, doesn't quite get his stuff out. Anyway, there we go. It's interesting to hear the definitions on free speech. I would say it's always true that politicians, governments, and judges find ways to redefine free speech. Normally, everybody knows what this is about. In a very brilliant book by Farrar, he defines the golden age of free speech in England, and you talk about vaccination. The way that people's fears about vaccination in those days was dealt with was by a brilliant cartoon about cowpox, in which the man, Lister, who tried to do vaccination originally, found that most people believed they grew the heads of cows. The satirist drew this he argued the debate. If there is no freedom of speech, you can't argue the restraints on freedom of speech. The whole thing becomes ludicrous. I'm going to repeat that because it should have got a round of applause. Without freedom of speech, you cannot argue the boundaries of freedom of speech. So it's ridiculous. Thank you very much. For God's sake, there's no restriction on applause. So, I would say I am very interested to hear these arguments about how it's sedition, it's blasphemy, it is dangerous in some way. That is what I'm saying. It is more dangerous to try and restrict these things because then people do not talk about them and then they resort to other means. So yes, freedom of speech is dangerous, but it's a lot less dangerous than silence. You've got 8 seconds to fill in. Oh, no.
Thank you. Can I ask for a rebuttal for the motion by Pavan Varma?
I think it's time to discuss this subject more seriously. Because what we've heard there from the opposing side are endorsements of what we are saying. It's amazing. We are not saying freedom of speech is bad. We are saying it's dangerous. And they are saying reasonable restrictions are good. Who defines them? They don't tell us. I want to tell you the real problem is there is a great disjoint between theory and practice. Theory says at the entrance of parliament, Udara Charitanam Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam. For the big-hearted, the entire world is a family. You know what the practice is? What is still happening with the poor, the oppressed? It continues. The theory says Constitution 19(1)(a) gives us the freedom of speech and expression. But then you bring in reasonable restrictions, so it becomes a dangerous idea. Suppose you set out from your house, and because accidents take place, nobody will tell you not to drive. But if you are told that if you drive, an accident will take place, you will take a metro. You will not drive. That is the problem today with freedom of speech in an imperfect system. What we have to think about is to improve our democracy, to create a situation where freedom of speech does not become dangerous. If you don't do that, you are in an imperfect system. Freedom of speech is a dangerous idea. Please accept that danger if you want to, but don't say that it's not dangerous. Because we are an imperfect democracy. Hopefully we'll become perfect, but that will take time. Until that happens, it is a dangerous idea. Accept that. I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but it's a dangerous idea. And that all of us should understand.
Thanks, Pavan. Can I ask Navdeep Suri to do the rebuttal?
You know, there have been a lot of comments about getting us afraid of social media. We worry about what's going on, particularly in the age of AI. And the government worries too. And then the government tries to fix the problem. And so we get a new IT Act. And guess what it does? It makes us world champion in 2 categories. The maximum number of demands to pull down posts to Facebook, YouTube, and X are from us. The greatest number of internet shutdowns across the world, any country, is us. And my question is again, the way the restrictions are being imposed, you are empowering a district magistrate and a superintendent of police to shut down internet in an entire district on suspicion of a local problem. Think, what does it do to your UPI? What does it do to e-commerce? What does it do to the economy at large in this new Bharat that we are building? As far as the contention that free speech is a dangerous idea, I can only say Any alternative that anybody else can come up with is a lot more dangerous. So if you are choosing between two, free speech is still your better option than somebody deciding for you how much you can speak, what you can speak, about whom you can speak, which website. I reject this notion of infantilizing the public and having a MyBap decide for you. Thank you.
Priyanka Chaturvedi, you ready for round two? Okay.
So, firstly, I must say I'm pretty surprised with the kind of arguments that were thrown our way. Words were put in our mouth that we're talking about censorship. We are talking about a regime where we won't allow anyone to speak. We will come down heavy on you. Sorry, none of us mentioned this. None of us mentioned it. All we said was that as far as freedom of speech is concerned, there are some dangerous ideas which are harmful for the democracy itself. When we have misinformation, when we have election processes rigged, when we have problematic narratives which shape the democracy, when we see undermining of democracy which are used by technological platforms to spread disinformation, that is when I say freedom of speech becomes harmful and dangerous. I'm not saying freedom of speech is problematic. I say it becomes dangerous when it intersectionalizes with those who want absolute power, with those who want technology, those who want to own technology. That is a problem. Let me tell you and let me quote this. Free speech is not dangerous because ideas exist, but because we pretend that all ideas deserve equal protection, which can also lead to harm. So would you say, when a woman says that this kind of freedom of speech is creating problems for me, when a child's photographs are morphed under the garb of freedom of speech and tech innovation and research, it is not problematic? We are protecting those ideas. What ideas are we protecting? The ideas that we are protecting is, yes, there is a freedom of speech to bring new ideas, to shape societies, to bring positive reforms, not to pull down all the institutions that have been created through disinformation, through fake narratives, and wanting to control. This is what exactly it is. And when you say things like, oh, we have a problem with what is dangerous, when the people who are for the idea of freedom of speech are making these comments, they are dangerous. I'm sorry, sir, you are very intolerant then. You're very intolerant to a different idea of what freedom of speech really means. And when you sit in judgment, just before arguments and counter-arguments begin, you've lost the debate already. So that is how I would end it with, and look forward to the next round.
Thank you. Okay, our final rebuttal, our final speaker in this round. Can I ask Navtej to speak?
Right. 2 or 3 points that were made from the other side. A lot has been said about fake news and what people like Trump and Elon Musk, etc. are saying. Let me clarify. This is not free speech. This is abuse. This is distortion. And there are laws which are there to counter it. You cannot throw your baby out with this dirty bath water. So if you're worried about keeping your baby, then make this important distinction. This is happening because not only our democracy is imperfect, a lot of countries in this world at the moment are imperfect, and there is not enough fight back. The answer is to fight back, and you can't fight back if you give up your first principles. The second thing is that this is not peculiar to this age. Let us not think we are privileged and only in our time such things are happening. People will remember that Galileo was punished because he said that the earth goes around the sun. Ultimately, he was spent his entire life in house arrest. Copernicus, who said the same thing, was not punished because he managed to die as soon as he published his book. He did not even wait to sign his copies. The third thing, there was a question raised as to who wrote these reasonable restrictions. Well, your Constituent Assembly wrote these restrictions. They understood the nature of this country. They understood the problems that an uncontrolled freedom of speech can cause. So they maintained the principle and put in the restrictions. Each one of them was debated. Each one of them was debated by the wisest men that this republic saw before the constitution came into being. So let us remember that these are not arbitrary. Each reasonable restriction is related only on the basis of law can it be imposed.
Okay, we're now into round 3, and this is the round where we speak to each other and I ask them questions. There's the round 4 where you'll get to ask questions, but let's do round 3 first. Before that, Farah, you were going to make a point, finish it, because it's only fair.
Well, is it great? I mean, underlying our belief in free speech is the idea that it's the way to advance knowledge and truth. That if we all just freely discuss things, we'll get a better understanding of them. And that's true in various domains, but what we often miss is that that requires some kind of rules. For example, what is it we're trying to do with our freedom of speech? There are many different kinds of free speech. Free speech for artists and writers of fiction doesn't require the truth, the literal truth to be important. But in politics, if you just allow people to lie and spread untruth, that will harm what you're trying to do. Okay. Anyway, Jonathan Swift is great quote.
This can't be a full-fledged rebuttal, right?
No, I'm just going to give you the quote. The quote is about the truth and falsehood in a free market of ideas. He says at one point, falsehood flies, lies are very fast. Falsehood flies and truth comes limping after, like a man who's thought of a clever repartee long after the party is over. So in other words, lies can spread very fast, and truth is hard to establish and defend, and it needs more than just the idea that it will automatically appear.
Okay, all right. So let's just discuss something we've been dancing around. All the Indian speakers have referred to it at some stage or the other, and that's the state of free speech in India. So let's focus on that. Can I ask the Indian speakers on both sides, if they were to rate the state of free speech in India today out of 10, how many marks would they give us? Anish, out of 10, the state of free speech?
You're putting me on the spot and you'll get my free speech cancelled tomorrow.
Yeah, that's the idea.
I'd say we're at a
member of the opposition, you shouldn't be scared of say.
We're at a solid 2.
2 out of 10? All right. Pavan?
I'll give it 4, and I'll ask you, Veer, why have you stopped appearing on mainstream television? Because you're not part of the Godi media.
Okay, all right. Okay.
Simply put.
Yeah, okay, all right. Priyanka, out of 10?
I'd also keep it at 4, and I would say ditto to what Pavan said. Even I don't appear on television anymore, because that's not really freedom of speech. That's, like Sarna ji said, it's abuse.
Okay, so 2 and 4. Navtej?
I would give it 6 because I believe in hope.
No, I'm asking you what it's like now, not what you hope.
6.
6 out of 10? All right.
Because of hope.
Okay. Navdeep?
I'd also give it a 6 because here we are discussing this subject as we are, but it used to be better.
Hang on a minute. You're saying this is a country where you're not allowed to laugh and you're still giving it a higher mark than anybody else?
Yeah, because you have islands
Yeah.
of oppression and you have islands of freedom. And you
Okay.
need to see both of them while you make a decision.
Okay. And you said it's not as good as it used to be. So you would say, once upon a time, say 12 years ago, to pick an arbitrary figure, it was higher, it was better?
Yes, I do.
Yeah?
Yes.
Would you say that too?
That's right.
12 years ago, it was better?
Yeah.
Well, 3 members of the opposition on that side. But Priyanka, was it better 12 years ago?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've been a spokesperson ever since I remember.
Yeah.
And there was some freedom to speak my mind and be a member of the opposition and a responsible member of the opposition. I continue to be a responsible member of the opposition. But freedom of speech and its responsibility seems to have ended. And there's the fine balance that used to be there a few years ago is totally vanished.
Pavan?
You know, Veer, I'd like to answer your question by saying, and I want the audience to please listen for one moment. What this proposition is doing and what my opponents in this debate are doing is to conflate dangerous with bad. We are saying it's good, but it's dangerous. And that is the proposition. Please understand the distinction. In a perfect system, in an ideal way, freedom of speech is essential. And I can quote more couplets on it than my learned friends there. जो सवालों से डर जाए वो हुकूमत कैसी, और जो जनता न पूछे वो जनता कैसी. भाई ये तो सच है. मैं तो मानने को तैयार हूं. I am saying that don't think that when we are saying it's a dangerous idea, we are so foolish to say it's a bad idea. We are saying it's a good idea, which today in an imperfect system is a dangerous idea.
Okay.
If you don't understand this difference, and they don't seem to.
Okay, okay. We get that, Pavi. I just asked you for marks out of 10, yeah. Your whole speech.
I gave you 4.
Yeah.
I gave you 4.
No, was it better earlier?
I think it's progressively declining.
Okay,
It's
all
not
right.
about this government or the other. And it's a worldwide, global phenomenon.
Okay. Anish, was it better earlier, say 12 years ago?
I can't go much further back in history than a few years ago, but I will say that freedom of speech has always been under attack because the illusion of freedom of speech has been created by the few in the place of the many. And it's an illusion that has kept alive this idea that some of us are free while the others can have their speech curtailed.
So is it worse or is it not?
Of course it's worse.
It's worse, all right.
But I'm not saying it was perfect earlier either.
No, nobody's saying that, but was it better?
Of course it was better.
All right. So let me ask you the question. We're in a democracy, we have elections. You say that we were in a situation where freedom of speech was much better. Most of you say that, perhaps not Navtej. So why, with freedom of speech, have we voted for this?
If I can begin there, I think unfortunately freedom of speech has become like decolonization. It's
Okay.
become a hollow word. You know, decolonization without a transfer of power to the most marginalized is pointless. Freedom of speech without the conditions that allow the freedom of speech to be enjoyed by everyone is pointless. And unfortunately today, we're taking away freedom of speech from more people every single year than expanding access to that freedom of speech. And therein precisely lies the problem.
But you're like walking a tightrope between saying freedom of speech is pointless because the marginalized don't have it and saying it's dangerous.
No,
Which
it's
one is it?
dangerous
Pointless
because
or dangerous?
It's dangerous because unfortunately, you cannot promise it to the many who believe in it. So
Then
you're
why is it
selling it as
then
an
why is it
opium of the
dangerous?
masses.
If you can't give it to anyone, why
Because
is it
someone
dangerous?
who believes in it then decides to raise slogans at GNU thinking that this is a country governed by a constitution and ends up in jail. And that person who believes in freedom of speech does not know it's dangerous.
All right, okay. So let me ask all the Indians, if we had freedom of speech and you believe things were better, why have they got to this stage? Why have we chosen this voluntarily?
I think it is about power, wielding of power, silencing voices. Silencing voices to a point where anyone else who wants to speak up finds it a dangerous proposition. And that is where we are headed towards and we are heading towards. Anyone who speaks up, for example, I'll tell you about very recent episode where A.R. Rahman has made certain comments. You may disagree with those comments. Totally disagree with those comments, and I also disagree with those comments. However, he, as someone who is living that reality, has spoken from that point of view. We've literally silenced him by saying, how can you even say it? For him to come out with a video and clarify what he was trying to say.
Yeah.
So I think that is when it becomes, when you think that yes, everybody has freedom of speech. But for him, freedom of speech turned out to be a dangerous proposition. And that is what we are trying to say here, that in this case, we keep talking about freedom of speech for all, but it has become a selective power-wielding mechanism. For those who have power can speak, and those who have power can wield that freedom of speech, but those who are disempowered, they'll further disempower you by controlling what you speak.
And you would agree with that?
No, I just want to say that one of the reasons why we have come to where we are, where a good thing has become dangerous, is people like Navtej Sarna, who say, I'll give it 6 because I believe in hope.
Yeah.
अरे भाई उम्मीद पे तो सारी दुनिया जिंदा है. They don't understand the reality of today, or for purposes of the debate, they act delusional.
Okay, all right.
That is the truth.
So Navtej Sarna, are you delusional? Are you dangerous?
I don't know what I am, but I'm not a politician.
Sorry, even I have to clap.
All right, all right.
Even I have to say that you'd make a very good politician.
Navdeep, why do you think we've got to this stage where you think we can't laugh?
I think what you're seeing is, one is a function of polarization. You're seeing it everywhere else. But I think in India, on this whole issue of the restricting freedoms, what you're seeing is the growing nexus between government and large media houses and the way they are controlling the way information is fed to us.
That is dangerous. That is dangerous.
Okay, all right.
That is undesirable.
It is dangerous.
And it is what, when I said we are on a sliding scale, we are, if 6 now, we were better before.
Yeah.
It's because of this phenomenon of the growing control that politics and media business exercise on large chunks of the media. This was not there 10 years ago.
Okay, so let me ask the audience that. We've asked them to give marks on the state of freedom of speech in India. So I'm going to give you a set of numbers. If you think that's the correct state of freedom of speech in India, I'm accurate, put your hand up. How many people think it's a 10 out of 10 at the moment? Okay. 9 out of 10? Okay. 8 out of 10? Okay, one person. It must be lonely where you are, sir. 7 out of 10? One person, 2 people. 6 out of 10? About 3 or 4. 5 out of 10? A lot of people. 4 out of 10? Okay, even more people. 3 out of 10? We're coming there. 2 out of 10? Okay. 1 out of 10? Well, somebody. 0, somebody said 0. 2 people. All right. So we have basically a house that believes freedom of speech in India is severely restricted. Yes or no? All right. Ian Hislop, you've made your career out of freedom of speech. Yeah? If there wasn't freedom of speech, you wouldn't have a job. When you come to India and you see responses like that, what do you feel?
I thought censorship had cracked in a bit early with no microphone. That's quite depressing, to feel that A, it was much better before, and B, it's that low. So that is obviously reflective of a number of other countries in the world where they don't get the chance to put their hand up and give it any marks. They don't get to go out in the street at all. They don't get to say anything. And the news is full of all of those. I can't speak, I'm not an expert on anything really, but certainly not here. I know that freedom of speech is never absolute. It's never 10 out of 10. I've been doing the same job for about 40 years, and sometimes it's more repressed, sometimes it's less repressed. Okay. It varies, but I don't want to get a reputation for being serious. So I would like to recount a true anecdote about how censorship works in Britain. During the first Iraq War, you may remember the Allies bombed Iraq, and the original plans were called Shock and Awe, and there was a highly secret document called Operation Desert Storm. Yep. It was placed in the back of a Volvo outside a sales room, and someone stole it. Our entire plans for the Allied invasion of Iraq were stolen from outside a building. The person in charge of national security in Britain is an admiral. He's in charge of the D-Notice Committee. And this is how Britain works now. He rang me up, and he said, "Hello." I said, "Hello." He said, is that Ian Hislop?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "You know these plans for Operation Desert Storm?" I said, "Yes." He said, "You haven't got them, old boy, have you?" That's the kind of repressive state that I want to live in.
I think we'd all agree with that, yeah. But can I ask you then, you've actually created scandals, created uproars in your country, worked for justice. You've caused trouble to governments with freedom of speech. You've been in trouble yourself. You've nearly gone to jail because of freedom of speech. So surely it's dangerous, both for you and for the government. So why are you saying it's not dangerous?
I'm not. I'm on this
Right,
side.
on the other side.
I hate to correct you.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. But what are you saying there?
I'm saying it's dangerous.
Yeah.
It's
There you are. There you've got the admission. It's dangerous. That's the proposition. It's dangerous. Thank you.
I thought I was,
listen,
the proposition.
Hang on.
Hang on, I'm the proposition, aren't I?
No. You're saying it's not dangerous. They're saying it's dangerous.
It just shows how ludicrous this is. Can we change the proposition to, is freedom of speech a good idea?
All right. So
okay, my last point, anyway. Okay, I think it is dangerous, and that's the whole point of it, and I think it's dangerous for your colleague who you mentioned who's ended up in jail. I don't think that means freedom of speech is pointless because someone's been arrested. The entire history of freedom of speech is about people being arrested, and incrementally, those people, how dare you, incrementally that goes on. I also think your other point that essentially freedom of speech is exercised only by those in power. It always is to start with. It's middle class, it's lawyers, it's journalists, it's people who go in. And the answer is not to say, well, there's only a few people who get to exercise it. The answer is to extend freedom of speech further, which I'm sure is your point. So I suggest you vote for all of us.
Not sure which side that was on, but yeah, good point. All right, let me ask the audience if they want to ask questions. Okay, I think there are people with microphones who will come to you. Let's start with somebody at the back. Choose somebody at random and give the microphone, because I can't really see from here. Choose somebody, sir. Yeah. Yeah, please stand up, say who you are, and ask your question.
I'm Daksh. I'm from Melbourne, Australia.
Okay.
And my question is, how can you say that freedom of speech, well, okay, I'll start again. Freedom of speech would mean equal voice, so there must be a platform for everyone to speak freely. And Elon gave that platform with X, like Twitter.
Yeah.
So how can you say that what Elon is doing with artificial intelligence and people doing creepy things with it is his fault that he's making it?
Okay, all right, I got that. You're saying for freedom of speech to work, people must have a platform to express themselves. Musk has given people that platform. Why are you objecting? That's basically your question, right? Well, we know who that question is for. Ian Hislop. Yes. Because you were busy making notes, I'll tell you what he said.
Can I answer that question, dear?
Okay, all right, you start. He'll work out what it is in between. Yeah.
So this is illustrating that you can't be heard unless you have a microphone. And amplification is something we often forget when we're arguing about free speech. We like to think of it's about individuals on the one hand and the power of the government on the other hand. But actually, always, through history, it's also been about platforms and amplification, and that determines how public opinion is shaped. So in a healthy democracy, you want a plurality of media. You don't want people to be banned from television if they don't toe the party line, etc., etc. In that sense, this country has declined tremendously in the last 15 years or so. There's much less diversity, and that's what autocrats everywhere are trying to do. Anyway, back to Elon Musk. Yep. He's not giving people an equal say at all. The whole point about social media algorithms is that they amplify certain messages and suppress others, certain voices and suppress others. He amplifies his own crazy voice over everyone else. It's well documented. And so we need to look at the power of the media, and people throughout history have identified this as something that is really important. The power of the media is considerable. Is it held by enough of a diverse community of people, or is it always just rich people, powerful people amplifying the messages that they like? That's the case today. American social media companies have immense power, and that is something that we need to grapple with as a society, because they don't allow equal voice. Okay, I'm going to shut up.
I get that. Somebody else with a question? Let's do somebody from the front now. Choose somebody at random.
Yeah, we are discussing the...
You have to say who you are.
Yeah, my name is Samay Gora. I am from Jaipur. everything is a dangerous idea. It's the democracy is a dangerous idea. The freedom of speech is a dangerous idea. Even driving is a dangerous idea. So what should we do?
Okay.
Practice caution.
Okay.
Practice caution.
Priyanka Chaturvedi, if you were to cross the street today, you might get run over. If you were to take a flight back to Bombay, your plane might crash. Life is dangerous. Get over it, is what he's saying.
No, all I'd say is practice caution, right? We all look at the left and the right when we cross the road. When we go to vote, right now I know the entire noise of one side is drowning the other side, but you think, you use your mind before you vote. So I would only say practice caution. Everything is dangerous. But at the same time, when we're saying our proposition is not that it is just dangerous. If you use caution, it may not be dangerous.
All right.
So
okay.
that is the point.
All right. Somebody from the middle, if you can find choose somebody in the middle.
Hi, my question is for the panel for the motion. So let's say we all agree that it's a good idea and it's being contorted by people in power to misuse it and oppress.
Yeah.
So if the idea of freedom of speech is being contorted, wouldn't us walking away from here and calling it a dangerous idea be contorted even more? Let's say we start calling freedom of speech dangerous, then also the people in power would be using it to oppress anyway.
Okay, good. Anish, you want to handle that?
And that's a difficult question, and I think that puts us precisely in a generative space. If we don't have freedom of speech, what new subversive forms of resistance can we develop? What forms of building community can we evolve? How can we acknowledge that freedom of speech is dangerous today and perhaps build towards a world where that freedom of speech can be built again?
Okay, all right, somebody else? Let's take somebody from the back who I can't see from here.
Hi. My name is Sahaj, and I was one of the very few people who was for the motion. So I have a very basic question. So the conclusion.
Are you still for the motion?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right.
So my question is that conclusively, freedom of speech is not a dangerous idea as long as you're okay with going to jail or have the balls to, question mark. And if you do...
Hang on, he's saying, the motion is saying it's a dangerous idea. What are you saying? I thought you were on their side.
It's a dangerous idea, I am. But I'm saying in conclusion, it's a dangerous idea. It's not a dangerous idea as long as you're okay going to the jail. Is that what the against people are trying to say?
Okay, all right, okay. Let me take that. Yeah.
So what I want to say is, the whole point from the other side is it is dangerous because we are in an imperfect society or an imperfect polity. That polity, that society would get a whole lot more imperfect if you didn't have freedom of speech. So this is the only break you have on it going completely off the rails.
Okay. Let me ask Alice that. Can you conceive of a situation where you have democracy without freedom of speech?
No, I certainly can't, and I think it's a question of degrees of danger, and I think that it's more dangerous not to have free speech. But I think it's worth pausing to think what we really mean or hope to mean by speech, and are we confusing it with freedom of repartee or freedom of chatter or freedom of monologue? Speech, after all, is at its best when it's dialogue and it includes listening.
All right, thank you. That's right. Somebody on this side? Hi.
Hi, I'm one of the few people who voted 0 out of 10.
You may be, but I still can't hear you, so hold the mic nearer.
I'm one of the few people who voted 0 out of 10 when you took the poll. I just wanted to add a layer to all the discussion that happened here.
Is this a question?
With respect to women in India, since it's very India specific.
All right.
Is there do women sometimes get away with some kind of speeches? Is there less freedom of speech for women? How do women really factor in all this, all the discussion that took place?
All right, okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Priyanka Chaturvedi, do you think freedom of speech is not given to women in quite the same way as it is to men?
I absolutely concur with her. As a woman politician who has been speaking out, I have faced consequences of it on several occasions. Right from trolling to character assassination to various other things. So that is when I start to feel, and that is why I feel all the more committed to keep speaking up, because if I stay silent, we are failing a whole lot of women who find it difficult to come out and speak. And let me also tell you, social media also is all these digital platforms also silence women. They tell the women that it's okay to bully you, it's okay to use AI to try and silence you. So those are the, dangers that we have been trying to overcome, and we have to keep speaking up. But my request to all the women in India would be, don't stop speaking up. Don't stop it all.
Yeah.
Because the more you speak, the more you make yourself obvious, the more you make yourself heard, and you then become a part of the power structure that shapes these policies.
Navtej, would you agree with that?
Well, I don't have a personal experience, but what
I
I
would
do...
imagine not, no.
Yeah, but what I do, I agree with Priyanka that you have to keep speaking up. Yeah. Because my point all along has been, you just can't give up this fundamental, natural right of a human being. You can restrain it under certain conditions. You know where your limits are, because my right ends where your nose begins.
So, is speaking out then for women, people are that dangerous?
Well, I mean, they will know when it becomes dangerous, but it is not dangerous completely. I mean, we have lived through the emergency.
I want to say something here.
Yeah, go on.
Saying freedom of speech is dangerous is not equal to emergency. Let me be very clear. Saying freedom of speech is dangerous is not equal to censorship. Saying freedom of speech is dangerous is not equal to banning any kind of speech. What I was trying to say here is that women speaking up is anyway a dangerous proposition in India. Yeah. It's a dangerous proposition in India. What if women start to speak? What if women start to ask for their rightful space in this particular system? That is a dangerous idea. And when they start to speak, that freedom of speech becomes a dangerous proposition. That is what I was trying to say. Your actions should not stop. Your ability to be able to be that woman, that strong personality that you are, and make your point should not stop, was what I was trying to say.
That you would agree with, Navtej?
Yeah, that's a much wider question which can't be debated. It's absolutely correct.
Alice, is that true globally? Do women have less agency when it comes to free speech?
Yeah.
Asking her.
I'm speaking for her.
Okay, sort of a final question to round things up. Your view is freedom of speech, good but dangerous. Your view is freedom of speech, good, not so dangerous?
No, good but dangerous.
Is dangerous. So is freedom of speech a dangerous idea, Ian Hislop?
At the risk of repeating myself, freedom of speech is dangerous, and that's the whole point.
That's their side.
Can I just say that ultimately good argumentation convinces even your opponents. We were saying it's a good idea, but it's dangerous today. And the greatest proponent as a journalist of freedom of speech is saying it's a good idea, but it's dangerous. So we have both concurred.
No, I'm going to speak over you because I've had enough of that.
All right, go on.
You haven't convinced me of anything. The first point I made was the exact point that I've just made again. No offence, as a number of people repeatedly say to me. And I always say, why not?
I don't think I have anything as eloquent as Ian to say, except that our side is really saying that in terms of degrees of danger, it's silence that's more dangerous. And the censorship that happens in your own head, which perhaps is what women suffer from, that is an even greater degree of danger.
Pavan Varma, what is more dangerous, freedom of speech or silence?
Without a doubt, silence.
So then what are we arguing about?
Yeah, because this is the whole point I'm making. The answer to freedom of speech being dangerous is to accept reality as it is. It does not mean that we abdicate our right to defend freedom of speech. We are proposing what your proposition is. That in the circumstances today, it's a dangerous idea. You've just had a distinguished member of the opposition agreeing with this idea publicly. That means...
Oh, we just had him saying, no, he doesn't agree with you publicly.
Well, that he has the liberty of changing what he said publicly, which all journalists have, with your exception.
However, the idea of being criticised for changing my mind from a politician.
But the only
And who
clarification...
says no one laughs in India?
The only clarification I want to add
Yeah.
is that the proposition doesn't say in today's context.
Yeah, but equally it doesn't not say that, so it's up to him.
No,
right?
that's each one of us has defined his own context.
No, so
Alice, you want to say? Did you want to say? All right. So, final, if you are not willing to take sides, I notice. But given that nobody here seems to be really on any one side, is that wise? Because it's too complex an issue?
It is a really complex issue. That's part of the problem in the world today, that we think it should be simple, we should be for or against, we should be able to sort it out. And unfortunately, it's ultimately not a completely coherent idea. On the one hand, we have individual
You've written
rights.
a book about it.
I've written a whole book about it. I spent 10 years. We can't do this. And I think the whole point of this festival is really interesting. It's to get people to read books. And we get people to read books by coming on stage for 40 minutes and trying to grapple with a huge question, only to show that to really understand the question, you need to go away and buy a book and really get into the deep,
as you said,
deep understanding of it.
an incredibly readable and complex book, right?
What did you say there?
I said, as you said at the beginning, an incredibly readable book.
Yeah, a incredibly readable book, but not just mine, but also Alice's and Ian's.
All right, okay. So here we have it. I don't think, frankly, we had a coherent discussion in terms of who was on which side. What we do have, I think, is, I'm sorry, we're out of time. What we do have is the idea that freedom of speech is a good thing. It may be a dangerous idea. Some people are of the view that it is in the Indian context. Some people are of the view that it's dangerous unless it extends to everybody. You know, as the saying goes, freedom of the press is guaranteed to anyone who happens to own one, but it's not really much good unless everyone has it. So I think what we have, though I think Sanjoy is going to come and get a vote from you at the end, is a debate that doesn't tell us one thing or the other. It tells us how complicated freedom of speech is, how complicated life is, and particularly life in India at the moment. But it does tell us, and I think even this side will probably agree, that yes, sometimes dissent can be dangerous, but I think they would all agree it's worth it. Okay, Sanjoy, take it away.
Thank you to all our debaters for making this really interesting. And now it's over to you to tell us whether you agreed with them, disagreed with them, and which side, whether the vote moved at all. Ladies and gentlemen, the proposition for the 19th Jaipur Literature Festival presented by Vedanta was freedom of speech is a dangerous idea. All of you who vote for the motion, freedom of speech is a dangerous idea, shout and raise your hands. It certainly moved a little bit. The freedom of speech is a dangerous idea. Those of you who disagree with the motion, shout and raise your hands. The motion, against the motion has won it. Ladies and gentlemen, freedom of speech is a dangerous idea, has lost the floor today. Continue to shout and scream and defend every minute of the freedom of speech. It's our only right. Thank you all. Look forward to seeing you next year. We've got our closing film, which we'd love you to see. Go for it. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. May I please ask Sharupa and our colleagues to come up and present a token of our appreciation to each of our speakers.